What's going on, Orlando Magic fans? You guys are back with the six-man show. It is May 24th, 2020. I'm here with Luke Sylvia. What's up?
I'm great. I'm actually can't lie to you right now. To my left, I have the match on TBS, hosted by Turner Sports. You know, with Phil Mickelson, Tom Brady, the GOAT, and playing against old Manning and Tiger Woods, the other GOAT. So I'm just glad to have live sports right now, to be honest with you. So I have to have it on while we record. I apologize.
No, it's off to my right, so don't apologize whatsoever. I'm trying not to pay attention to it. Tom Brady, about 25 minutes ago, hit one of the most ridiculous shots I've ever seen in golf in my life. So what I didn't really process until just now when you were kind of naming those names is we have arguably the greatest player to ever play their sport, and then their arch nemesis rival for most of their career when you talk about Tiger and Phil Mickelson, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. So that's a pretty cool dynamic. You know, these guys have fought over championships for the better part of their careers. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and I think the other part that's pretty cool about it is Tiger was talking about in his pre-round interviews was saying that, you know, this isn't going to be unfamiliar territory for him to, one, play against Phil, two, play with Peyton. He said he and Peyton Manning are great friends. They play all the time. He said, you know, we played hundreds of times together. So it's pretty cool to see, there's no fans there. I'm sure to an extent it does feel like it's a production, but also you got to think most of the time here they kind of just act like they're friends where they are friends, and it's kind of just, you know, four buds playing golf.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. In my opinion, it just seems like four buds playing golf, talking a lot of trash. There's been some trash talk between, you know, the players that are participating in the event and the analysts, you know, like Charles Barkley, which
Justin Thomas,
like you mentioned earlier. I've really enjoyed that aspect. I think Kevin Clark with The Ringer tweeted out that he would really like to see the NBA kind of incorporate this kind of style where we can, you know, have the players mic'd up and we can hear their conversations and find some way to do that in the NBA. You and I have talked about that, what that might look like in the NBA. Really hope that happens because I'm just having a blast watching this.
I can't remember who it was, but so Joe Buck, I think, was originally the one who said he would hope that they would pipe in sound for NBA games when they return, which, whatever. But to further that, someone else tweeted it, another analyst or something on Twitter. Can't remember the name is escaping me right now, but he said that now that you guys hear it in this soccer game, it was like a Bayern Munich game on FS1 yesterday. You know, now that you hear they piped in noise here, what do you think about it now?
Kevin
and I was
O'Connor.
Yeah, it was Kevin O'Connor. You're right. So
it sounds terrible,
and it's awful.
It's the weirdest feel.
But
was
here's the thing.
Physically uncomfortable listening to that.
But also at the same time, it's soccer, and the crowd is making the same. Like you can assume and expect what kind of noises that a crowd's going to be making. Are they going to be doing a dull chant while the ball is being dribbled up the field, and then once it's scored, one side erupts, right? So when it comes to piping in noise, super easy when it comes to soccer because they have noise coming from the audience the entire time. Meanwhile, in basketball, you do hear the announcers. They talk more. They don't take as many breaths when they're in between sentences. Soccer commentators do something that I actually love, which is, you know, they just kind of let the moment breathe. And in big moments, NBA commentators will do the same. But for the most part, soccer commentators are doing it throughout the whole match, whereas basketball commentators aren't. So you usually hear them at the forefront of your audio anyway. So piping in audio would just feel forced. I hope they don't do that because it would look dumb. They're playing in these facilities that aren't. I mean, to my knowledge, they're not, you know, NBA arenas, right? At Disney, so you're not fooling anybody. And obviously, if there's no fans in the crowd, you see empty seats. We don't want that. I don't think I want that.
Essentially what this is going to feel like, it's going to feel like, you know, being at, you know, like the rec center, you know, and playing pickup with the fellas, or being at, you know, an AAU tournament or some kind of rec league, and nobody's piping in noise at those games. It would feel ridiculous. it just wouldn't feel right. And even, like you mentioned, with soccer, it might be a little bit more predictable, but it just still did not feel right. Watching that clip, it just something felt really gross and wrong. That's the only way that I can put it.
I think it's just because we know that there's no crowd there. Who are you fooling? I don't think it matters. I think it was pretty counterproductive.
People just want sports back, and speaking of wanting sports back, it seems, Luke, with the reports that are coming out from like Ramona Shelburne, Adrian Wojnarowski, Shams, these different guys, and ladies, I said Ramona Shelburne, but that it looks like the league is closing in or they say exploratory conversations, but the language that they're using, it seems like they're kind of closing in on settling on Walt Disney World to be like the single site bubble or quote unquote NBA campus, as they're referring it to, for the league to return to play. And it's looking hopefully sometime in July where we start to see actual games again. So Luke, it seems like we're getting closer to getting basketball back.
It seems like we were there, and this has been such a roller coaster in terms for basketball fans, because I remember very beginning of quarantine, you and I talking and saying, still pretty optimistic. We don't know the details, but we're still optimistic that the NBA is going to come back, right? And then you fast forward a month, and you're like, wow, we're still in quarantine. We're probably full of negativity at this point.
This was a 2-week hiatus at the start.
Yeah, and so we're saying to each other, oh, maybe this we probably should start tampering our expectations. This probably isn't going to happen. And I know that's where I was at. Like, we're not getting an NBA back for this season. Let's just cancel it, chalk it up as a loss. That's it. But now you've got the NBA, because the biggest thing that was keeping me from being invested in, like, optimistic really, was that you didn't hear the big time reporters. You didn't hear the Wojs of the world really reporting this, like the NBA is nearing this. You weren't seeing official statements from the NBA, which is what we got, I believe, today or yesterday, that there was someone in the NBA front offices that released a statement saying, we're optimistic, or we hope that end of July we can have basketball games played. And I think that's kind of what has sent optimism through the NBA fan base, is that we've got this hope now that, maybe by the end of July. So hopefully these plans continue to be in motion, Jonathan. I know you want the NBA to be back. I want it to be back. Everybody wants it to be back. So if we can get this back sooner rather than later, that'd be great, because I'm assuming do have that Labor Day cutoff, September 7th, that they don't want to play past that date. So we need games by late July if there's going to be a return.
Yeah, and like I said, this was originally supposed to be like a 2-week hiatus, and then we were going to, review everything, see how we were doing, and then, maybe reevaluate and get back to basketball. Everything that we've gone through the last, 2+ months now, like 2 weeks, just looking back, was ridiculous. Like, there was no way that was ever going to happen, but with this just being so new, there was no way to really gauge that and know what was going to happen. But it was like that night, we've mentioned this, is that, me and my wife are talking amongst ourselves as everything's unfolding, in the Chesapeake Energy Arena in OKC. It's like, they're not going to cancel the NBA. There's no way they're going to stop playing NBA and, MLB, NHL, college sports. March Madness was just around the corner, and then just Rudy Gobert is diagnosed with coronavirus, and everything was just over. Yeah. And here we are, 2+ months later, without any sports. But no, I'm definitely looking forward to the prospect of the league returning to action. Like you said, they're still looking to wrap everything up around September. They're looking at like the end of June, early July to start like the training camp and everything like that.
Yeah.
They're still trying to figure out, do they play 70 games? Do they play 72 games? How did they get to that point? There are teams that have played 63 games. There are teams that have played 65 games to this point. How do all the logistics as far as wrapping up the regular season go? Do they jump right into the playoffs? So many things that are still, needing to be worked out. But in my mind, like, the most important thing is going to be the protocols and procedures to make sure that one, positive coronavirus test for a player doesn't shut everything down again. Like, the safety is going to be the thing that comes first, finding out how they're going to create this bubble. how they're gonna facilitate that for the players to keep them happy and everything like that. It's gonna be interesting. Still a lot of things that need to be worked out, but it seems like hopefully within I think the next 2 weeks the NBA is looking to make a decision. So that we're just waiting.
Yeah, that's the name of the game right now, Jonathan. And we've got another gear to shift here, and that is we kind of want to go through this whole season. If it were to essentially have ended, and just kind of getting that review out of the way, because it almost feels like we're in two different seasons, and that doesn't almost. Right. It definitely does, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to feel like forever in 2020 NBA history. You have the first leg of the NBA, you have that All-Star break, and then you have your second leg, which is very short second leg. Then you had another break, which was just as long as the offseason, and then you're back into it. And then we jump back in hopefully in December. But I know, Jonathan, we wanted to kind of dive into that first leg of the NBA season, and then kind of that post-All-Star break, which is stretched only about 10 games. So, Jonathan, where do you kind of want to start breaking down the season and what stood out to you?
Well, something I just wanted to ask you really quickly that kind of came to mind, the way that this feels. Do you follow like competitive League of Legends at all, like the NA League Championship Series?
Not really. There are some professional leagues I follow, but in gaming, but I don't think League of Legends is something I really follow.
So anyone familiar with League of Legends? So basically they have like a regular season, right? But it's broken up into two separate splits. So they have a spring split and then a summer split. So they basically play like, a whole season in the spring. Yeah. They have playoffs, they have a championship, and then depending on how you perform in that split, that helps weigh your eligibility for like the world tournament, where you have the Korean League, the European League, the Chinese League, everybody competing against each other, usually in like October, around October. But then you also have the summer split, where it's the same thing. You play a full season, you have playoffs, a championship, everything like that. And that's also weighted to, on how you're eligible or not for that world championship. So that's kind of how this feels. We had basically a fall winter split, and this is going to be like the summer split. Yeah. Like you mentioned, we kind of had like the first leg and then the second leg, but I got off on a tangent there. So basically, I mean, for me, and that, I think that's like the best way to describe the Magic season is in two separate entities or two separate legs, if you will, because that's exactly what happened. So like the first half of the season, this team was struggling mightily offensively, but we're one of the best defensive teams in the league, right? So if you look at pre-All-Star break, if we look at, split the league by offensive rating, so the Orlando Magic were 27th in the league with a 105.5 offensive rating. Look at the defensive rating, we're 7th in the league at 107.4. Flip that on its head, post-All-Star break, we're looking at the Orlando Magic first in the league, Luke. 10 games, kind of a small sample size, but still the number one team in the league post-All-Star break. 117.8 defensive rating. But when we look at the defensive side of the ball, 26th in the league, 115.9. So with me, the biggest thing with the Orlando Magic this season were like injuries, right? We're talking about Jonathan Isaac, Al-Farouq Aminu, DJ Augustine for some parts, Nikola Vucevic for some parts. The last stretch that we went through without Evan Fournier after, he sprained his elbow. Apart from that, it's just haven't been able to get the team all on the same page. It's either one night hot offensively, can't guard anybody, or the next night we're, world beaters on the defensive end and can't score the ball.
Yeah, and it's just weird that, that obviously we see it, sometimes that is the case with some NBA teams, regardless of the reason. But the one thing that stayed true, Jonathan, was just how streaky the Magic were throughout the year. And, obviously in a perfect world, we maybe could find a median and an average of, between that offensive rating and the first part, offensive rating, the second part, and the same thing with defense. But we just could never find that rhythm. And, there's a lot of things you can throw that at. You could throw it at Clifford rotations, him messing around with what he likes and doesn't like, maybe still trying to figure out the roster with Fulton. I don't know. I mean, you could probably make some excuses and all day as to why the Magic just couldn't seem to get on track and kind of be in sync both offensively and defensively. But the thing and that's why, you had games where streaks where, the Magic would win 4 in a row, then they would lose 3 in a row. And that just kind of alternated throughout the season. There was never really a win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. That only happened one to maybe 3 times throughout the season. And that's without really heavily looking at the schedule. But I'm pretty confident in saying that was the case.
Well, I mean, I think when you look at the season, right, like you kind of have to, like we look at the big picture, but then I kind of want to touch on like the smaller storylines throughout the season. So number one was like the emergence of Markelle Fultz being inserted into the starting lineup. I was in the building October 23rd, the home opener, the first game of the year against the Cleveland Cavaliers. When Markelle Fultz checked into the game towards the end of that first quarter, the building just completely exploded. Like the energy just changed. And you saw flashes of that in that first game. Markelle Fultz bringing the ball up court, bringing it to the half-court line, realizing that lane was wide open, driving straight through, dunking all over the Cavs, and the building once again just completely erupted. And talking on the podcast, we talked a couple of times about the fact that maybe Markelle would be starting by, December or maybe even the All-Star break because nobody knew really what to expect. This kid wasn't even really shooting free throws basically until like last June or July, and then has had to get himself back into basketball shape. So just the fact that he's able to take threes somewhat confidently, he's not afraid to take that shot if the defense gives that to him, he's going to pull up, right? So the fact that he even got to that point was amazing. But we just still didn't know what to expect out of him. So for him to be starting in the 5th game of the season, Steve Clifford saying, all right, DJ, and really it wasn't so much of a fact of, the starting unit is going to be better with Markelle, which, the early numbers really did indicate that, but it was more so of him trying to get better balance of offense in the bench unit and the starters. And I mentioned this hundreds of times this year on the podcast, in my post-game rants. It's just if we don't get good production out of Terrence Ross and then a few other guys in the bench unit, there just was this huge drop-off from the first to second unit. Steve Clifford has mentioned that multiple times throughout the year, but we have not, like you said, whether it's offensive rating, it's defensive rating, it's the first unit, it's the bench unit, it hasn't seemed like everybody's on the same page where the team is kind of clicking on all cylinders in order for this team to be really to the level that we expected them to be at, right? Like last year, they go on that 22-9 run to end the season, and then the front office decides, you know what, we're essentially going to run this back. We can't afford to lose some of these guys for nothing, so we're going to re-sign them. We have the same team. We're going to add guys like Markelle Fultz, Al-Farouq Aminu, Mo Bamba's coming back. So we're all, in my opinion, fairly reasonably optimistic that this team was going to compete maybe for a 4th, 5th, or 6th seed in the East this year. But for a rash of reasons, some of the ones that we just listed, it just hasn't happened yet. And it has really been really frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's something that, as a franchise that is, essentially whether you like the word or not, kind of rebuilding, despite being a team that is now making the playoffs. Hopefully that becomes a constant thing, boost the morale of the players. I know we've had players talk about it. Like guys like AG talked about what it meant to be in the playoffs and to finally get a taste of the playoffs. So right now, you got to think the goal is, they know they're not winning a championship this year, next year, the year after that, right? And they're being realistic with themselves. Obviously, there's a lot of good teams. You've got teams like the Bucks that have Giannis Antetokounmpo that are just otherworldly teams. We just don't stack up against them well, right? I think a lot of the reason the season kind of continued to go sideways was obviously January 1st. You lose your best defensive player in Jonathan Isaac. And, there's some concern there with, obviously there was also a point, that we actually realistically talked about. Is J.I. going to, if the season prolongs to July or August, do you think he'll be back? That was a conversation at one point, right? And that was the kind of the X factor defensively for the Orlando Magic as a team. And now we kind of have seen, they're releasing things. He's essentially not running under his own power, running in that anti-gravity, treadmill. And forgive me if any of my terminology is wrong. I'm not a doctor. And so, with him, there was a point where we were like actually entertaining the thought of, will J.I. be back? Possibly. But, since then we've kind of heard that J.I., it's possible he'll play if the season resumes, but that he'd have to be 110%. And I think that level of possibility, Jonathan, is so astronomically small at this point after seeing that, not running under his own power. It's a good thing that he's squatting the most, that he's squatted since his injury, things like that. We're getting good feedback, but I think we didn't understand how serious his injury was, and I don't think that it's worth much if we were to bring him back at 85-90% for the playoffs.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's worth it, and that was almost like a punch in the gut, the other day when that came out, because like you said, we had been talking about, maybe J.I. is able to come back. He originally had that 8 to 10 week, reevaluation period, and just kind of, I don't want to say we were misled, but just the way that the team kind of initially explained the injury, the way that he initially explained the injury right after the game. He thought the worst, and then he was walking around, and it felt pretty good. And then has the MRI, and then had like the PCL sprain or whatever it was. We're thinking, okay, maybe he's even able to come back, for the playoffs at that point. But seeing that was the first time that he's been able to actually run on it, and the fact that it's still on that anti-gravity machine, and he's, like you said, describing that this is the most that I've squatted so far. He didn't say, I'm squatting, what I was prior. He's not quite back at that level. The knee isn't quite back to that strength yet, but at this point, yeah, I think it's slim to none that we're going to see him, back in a Magic uniform this season. Without the Magic going on a deep playoff run, which we kind of agree is probably pretty unlikely in itself. But it sucks. That's the best way that I can put it, because J.I. was averaging career numbers. 12 points per game, 2.4 blocks, 6.9 rebounds, 1.4 assists, all career highs. Was by all means in the discussion for Defensive Player of the Year throughout the first 30 plus games of the season, and for him to go down on New Year's Day was just a huge blow to this team, and is probably the reason that they haven't been able to get back to that level defensively.
Yeah, and Jonathan, as I stated earlier, I'm no doctor. I've not had experience. I've not broken a bone before, Jonathan. So I have no knowledge, and I've not had any reason to get into that. But however, I do have a cousin who ran Division I at Austin Peay University, cross country and track, on scholarship. Very gifted athlete. Unfortunately, tore his ACL twice in the same leg. Within years of each other, essentially just kind of leading to the demise of his college running career, right? And so he reached out to me this week. Obviously, he's no doctor either, but this is coming from someone who has suffered with those type of things, those type of injuries, where you have to do things like that. So he texted me, and this is what he said: for what it's worth, with J.I. now running on an anti-gravity treadmill, he probably tore something and had a procedure. I don't know if that's common knowledge, but that's what it seems like to me. And then he went on to say, I was running in a pool 3 months after my surgery. Anti-gravity is a little bit past that as far as progression, but that means he can't put weight on his knee at all while running. So that's someone that knows a little bit more than me.
Yeah, and that's clearly speculation.
Oh, yeah, all speculation. We don't know at all. But what we do know is that the Magic do tend to kind of keep things under wraps, right? When it comes to trade talk, who they're looking at, unless they post a picture of their draft board, Rob Hennigan. And so they try to, keep things a little bit secret. But the main part that should be noted there is for people who don't know much about anti-gravity treadmills, that, like we said, legitimately, that means he can't put any weight on it. So, unfortunate, J.I. probably not going to be back if I had to put money on it. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Hopefully, Jonathan, we can resume this season so that we can get the 7th spot that I think we deserve, and match up against the Raptors as opposed to going up against Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Bucks.
last thing I want to mention about Jonathan is a couple of months ago we saw photos of him still wearing that knee brace, and him being a little over two or so months removed from that knee injury was a little bit concerning. I don't know if I would necessarily buy stock in the theory that he maybe had a medical procedure. I think that probably would have gotten out. I think the knee just probably hasn't responded to treatment maybe the way that they would have liked, and maybe it was a little bit more serious than they let on. Like you said, they don't tell us much, so everything that we're kind of talking about is purely speculation. But I'm right there with you. If we're able to get back to play, and play another, 5 or 6 games, so far this season, I think we're at 65 games. So for us to be able to get to that 70 mark, whether it's going to be 70 or 72, whatever they decide upon to meet those obligations with the regional sports markets, the TV markets there, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm right there with you. I'd love to see us get matched up with Toronto. I think that's the much better matchup. I don't know if anybody would argue that when it talks about the Magic, matching up with the Milwaukee Bucks. They just ate our lunch and stole our lunch money all year every time we played them this season. But a couple of things I wanted to talk about. So we had high expectations for Aaron Gordon coming into this season. You know what I mean? Looking at last year, he put up 16 points a game, career. As far as his overall progression, a lot of us thought it was like a career year. So 5.7 rebounds, 7.4 rebounds, which wasn't a career high. But then we looked at his assists, his ability to be a playmaker, create plays for others. Career high 3.7 assists last year. Shot the ball from 3 out of 34.9, so basically 35%, which is the league average. And we all thought that, man, if he can stick to that, maybe get a few more attempts per game, we should see Aaron Gordon take that leap and take that all-star leap. But this year, 14.4, like I said, down from 16 points a game last year. The rebounds have taken a little bit of a tick up to 7.6 from 7.4. The assists still at 3.7, but that three-point rate has dropped down to 30%. And I don't want to say, like, it's over for Aaron or he's never going to be X, Y, and Z or whatever. But at this point, like, I legitimately have concerns if he can ever reach that level. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, he's been on the team for a handful of years, right? And we kind of keep, it's easy to kind of give a player, the benefit of the doubt when your team isn't that good. Last year he did have a good year. It's just I would love to see his percentages take a jump, even if that means his points per game staying the same, right? If that's what it takes, he just takes better quality shots and, hones his skills better that way and his shooting percentages and to boost those up. If that's what it takes for a season for him to do that instead of maybe trying to force things, you look at it and also his free throw percentage is at 67.5, down from 73% from last year. He's shooting about the same from the line. It feels like Jonathan, he's kind of been the same player the last 1 to 2 to 3 seasons. And unfortunately with Aaron, that's kind of what you see is what you get. I would love to believe that he could progress. We saw some really good games, don't get me wrong, that he had offensively this year that kind of made the whole fan base think, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe he's going to start elevating his game. And then you look back at the numbers and you're like, oh man, maybe he won't. So we just don't really know. He's 24 years old. He's been with the organization for enough years, I think, to develop. I don't know where we place that blame. I don't think it's to the point where we start pointing fingers yet. But it is very concerning when it comes to Aaron Gordon, what the team should do moving forward with him. Do they put him on the trade block? Do they not when it comes time next year? There's a lot of question marks when it comes to Aaron Gordon and his game, where he fits on the team. I think that there's just been a lot that we've had to kind of work through with Aaron Gordon as a fan base.
I don't think you can lay the blame at any one person's feet. I think just obviously, his first few years in the season, or his first few years in the league, with just the carousel of coaches, whether that be Jacques Vaughn, James Borrego, Scott Skiles, Frank Vogel, then Steve Clifford, never being, we kind of talked about this last week as when we were talking about our Magic what ifs, but, this season was his first fully healthy summer where he also had the same coach, from one year to the next. So that was like that. His performance last year in the playoffs, Game 4 against Kawhi Leonard, the fact that as the year progressed, we kind of saw him evolve as a playmaker and be able to play a little bit more consistently. All of that got thrown into that pot of reasons why that Aaron Gordon should and could become an all-star this year. But we just haven't seen it. And with me, I think the thing is that he has not, I don't know if it's him or maybe it's the coaching staff, has not embrace the fact that Aaron Gordon is going to be most useful cutting off of the ball. Per possession, he's one of the best cutters in the entire league. They have not, in my opinion, embraced that enough. I think it was this game here in February against Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, where he had like 19 points in the first half, and they were almost all off of cuts, just people finding him, cutting to the basket, just easy baskets, getting to the free throw line, knocking down open three-point opportunities. Like, that is what Aaron Gordon needs to be. The stuff where he's still doing things, off of the dribble, turnarounds, trying to bully his way in the lane, that stuff doesn't work. He just needs to really embrace the 3 to 4 things that he's really, really good at, finishing at the rim through contact. He's a great passer, great perimeter defender, and he's a great cutter. If he could just embrace those few things, that's when I think Aaron Gordon could get to that all-star level. But talking about guys kind of taking the next step and taking more responsibility, I want to take just a couple of minutes as we're getting close to the end here to talk about Evan Fournier and the leap that he has taken this year, basically almost out of necessity. So talk about last year for just a moment after the 2017-2018 season where we saw Evan Fournier be one of the leading scorers on the team at 17.8 points per game, shot 37.9% from the three-point line. Last season, for the most part, now he's alluded to having some personal issues going on in his own life that attributed to some of his poor shooting last year, but those numbers dropped to 15.1 points per game as he shot 34% from the three-point line. So, Luke, just talk a moment about Evan Fournier and just kind of the way that he's miscast at times in his role for the Orlando Magic, but at the same time, the way that he stepped up his play, specifically like offensively, really out of necessity at times to try to keep this team afloat.
Yeah, I think you look at the numbers, and the numbers they don't lie. He's averaging the most points he's ever averaged, right? He's in terms of his 3-point percentage, that is probably the biggest leap that he's taken. Obviously he's coming up, about 3 to 4 percentage points when it comes to his field goal percentage, but that is in large part due to the fact that he's shooting almost 7 threes a game now. I think that the last time that he did that he shot this percentage was a few years ago.
His rookie season, basically, where he was shooting 1.4 attempts a game. So
yeah,
the
and
efficiency
then,
is ridiculous.
You saw in 2015 he shot 40%, but again, shooting 4.9 a game. So he's up at almost 7 now. So yeah, he definitely stepped up, like you said, out of necessity. We really didn't have a choice. And kind of just decided that he was going to start trying to take control of the team, which last year you definitely could argue, and I don't think it was a mistake to deem that Nikola Vucevic was our best player. This year, now there is a clear debate, and it might even be heavily in Evan Fournier's favor, that he is the best player on the team now. So he, like you said, he's been going. He went through some stuff last season, but this year he did bounce back. He's shooting better and playing better in basically every category in terms of percentages that you can see. So I think Evan Fournier did take a step up this year.
Evan Fournier, and you mentioned Nikola Vucevic a moment ago. Those are two of like the most polarizing players on the Magic, right?
Yeah.
Not really for any other reason but their play on the court. So we know that at their best, they're really solid players. At their best, Nikola Vucevic was an all-star, last year. But there are definitely fans out there, and I know that you kind of share some of that sentiment. And I think a lot of it is warranted. Some of it is completely ridiculous and a little bit too much. But can you just kind of talk from that perspective of those fans out there who at times are just really frustrated with the way that Evan Fournier plays, and why is that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, people are looking at kind of who Evan Fournier looks to, right? Who he looks to in the games on the line, who he looks to in a general possession that holds little weight in the game. Most people would say he looks to Nikola Vucevic. And most people would say that late game, they don't trust Evan Fournier. Obviously, there are stats that suggest that Evan Fournier is just fine in the clutch in the fourth quarter. Like he is good. He is respectable there. But because I think Magic fans, myself included, get so caught up in the moment of he should have hit that shot, he should have passed it to Markelle, he shouldn't try to be the guy. He's dealing with a rather young team. Yes, they've been together. That core has been together for a while. But you throw Fultz into the mix, that's a whole other thing. They're trying to find their grounding. I think they're just trying to get their footing. And there's just times where Evan Fournier is frustrating. I can speak on that. I know you can, but there's also times where if Evan Fournier wasn't on the roster, he does win us games. And Jonathan, I'm someone who is not an Evan Fournier truther, so I'm someone who can admit like he has played his butt off this season, and I think that he has made Orlando has won more games because of Evan Fournier than what they've lost.
Yeah, I would definitely largely agree with that. I think, and I kind of, a few, nights ago, watching, one of these Magic Classic rewinds on Fox Sports Florida, just kind of seeing the similarities that Evan Fournier and Hedo Turkoglu have to their games, right? Guys that, at times try to be a primary, ball handler and playmaker. I definitely think Hedo gets the nod. When you compare those two players, it's not even really that much of a conversation, but at times can also be very frustrating players. And I had to take that. I think if Hedo was on teams that didn't have as much success as they did, talking about like the 2008 and 2009 teams before he was traded, before the 2010 season, if he was on a team that had records, closer to what Evan Fournier has had, that those two players would probably be viewed by Magic players a lot closer than they are right now. Right, I think if Evan Fournier was on a better team, even if he was in the role that he is in now, if we had like a Dwight Howard and a Jameer Nelson on the team, players that could also elevate without taking too much away from Evan Fournier, I think Evan Fournier would be viewed drastically different. But I think the biggest issue that Magic fans have, whether they go overboard or not, I think it's rooted in the fact that he's just miscast. A lot of times, especially this season, he's been asked to be the number one option, the guy that to just go and get you a bucket. We've seen plenty of times when he's done that, but we've also seen more than enough times when he hasn't been able to do that. But at the end of the day, I think you have to view Evan Fournier as having the best season out of anyone on the Magic this year, outside of Jonathan Isaac getting hurt. He played 32 games. We're looking at Evan Fournier playing 61 games so far out of 65. And the 4 games that he missed came at the end of the season. Now, we could get into, is the team performing better with or without Evan Fournier? 4 games is way too small of a sample size to do that. Yeah. But there are some, you said you're not a Evan Fournier truther. There are anti-Evan Fournier truthers out there, especially that last 4-game stretch before the season was kind of brought to a halt. But let's look at Evan, 18.8 points a game, shooting 40% from the three-point line, like you mentioned, almost at 7 attempts. He's shooting the skin off the ball. There's no way around that.
And it's interesting you talk about Hedo and Evan in the same light. There are some similarities there. Obviously, Hedo benefited greatly from being on some great Magic teams. I think you slip Evan Fournier in that same spot, the result's the same.
I don't want to say the same, but comparable.
It is, yeah. I could. There were a lot of highlight moments for Hedo Turkoglu, but I think if you put Evan Fournier, and there's a lot for me to say, Jonathan. I know you know how much this kind of hurts me a
you're
bit.
Showing how big of a man you are. I really appreciate it.
But I think if you put Evan Fournier on that team. Like you said, results probably not exactly the same, probably a little bit worse. But also, you had an exchange via Twitter with, I believe, Philip Rosman-Reich, Orlando Magic Daily, about this topic maybe last week or whenever it was. But he had a really good word, which was, Turkoglu did make a lot of bad plays. He had a lot of 3 for 14 games.
Right.
It's like I said, it is easy to blend in on a very talented team when you're not having to be the guy. And I think that your sentiment that Evan Fournier is simply miscast, if he was thrown into a team where he had some guys that were a little bit better around him, we wouldn't be throwing stones like we do at Evan Fournier. It's just it's part of being a Magic fan. We're not an incredible team. Nobody thinks that, and if you do, I can't help you. But Evan Fournier is not going to be the guy to lead us to a championship. Aaron Gordon's not going to be the guy to lead us to a championship. I think that we're definitely a couple pieces away, and that's just something that as Magic fans you'd think they'd be used to, that we'd be used to, but those losses happen and you just start trying to point fingers.
So we're coming up on time here. We're going to wrap things up in just a moment, but one person that we didn't touch on, Luke, that I want to get your quick take on kind of what's gone wrong this season has been Nikola Vucevic. Hasn't played up to the level of last year. What do you think has kind of gone wrong there?
I can't really put a finger on it, because when you kind of look at the numbers in terms of his statistics, there doesn't look like there's been, too much of a drop off, right? He's had a decline in his field goal percentage and 3-point percentage, yes, but it is by 2 or 3% in each category. I don't know where we've gotten lost with Nikola Vucevic. I don't know why why it feels this way. I just know that it definitely, the numbers that he has and the stats that he have that are relatively close to what he did last year as an all-star, what it is that has kind of made this season feel just kind of like it fell flat for me and for a lot of Magic fans and Nikola Vucevic. I don't know if maybe the playoffs kind of started that for us, where he struggled against Gasol in the playoffs, and you saw that pretty much every game, right? So I don't know if that's where it started, where Magic fans started kind of to turn on Nikola Vucevic, because they were all on the train. We heard that's my all-star. We heard all these things, but now I don't know exactly what it is, Jonathan. But he's shooting a little less per game, but his percentages they've struggled somewhat. He's still shooting 47% from the field, and then obviously his 3-point percentage down from 37 to 33. But I don't know, man. His points per game are still there. His assists are still there. His rebounds are pretty much still there. I don't know, man. It's kind of a mystery, I think.
I think a lot of it has to do with perception, right? So the playoffs definitely got it started. And then at that point, a lot of people were like, look, we tried to tell you this. You guys were claiming this is your all-star. He didn't show up in the playoffs, right? And then going into that offseason, it was like, okay, now is the time to let Vooch walk. Now is the time to bring in the new guard. Got that, $100 million contract, and people lost their freaking minds. I can't believe we're bringing this guy back. Yeah. And a lot of those people, honestly, at this point, feel pretty vindicated. A large part of last year, him making that all-star team, where the high efficiency, the great games that he had at the first half of the season, and then he kind of came back down to earth after the all-star break and kind of normalized. So some of his numbers kind of came back down. But like you talked about, the efficiency has come down. I mean, dropping from 36.4% last year, basically down to 33%. That's, in my opinion, that's the biggest reason why. Yeah. That extra 3-pointer that he was knocking down last year on basically 2 less attempts, it's a big deal, right? The efficiency from the 3-point line, just having that threat. I still feel like teams view him as a threat from the 3-point line, but last year it just felt like he was just not missing those trail threes, those from open threes from the top of the key. It just felt like he was not missing those. And this year, it's like every time he pulls up, I'm just like, I'm holding my breath.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But largely, I feel like it's the perception that people were almost hoping that he would fail this year so that they could feel vindicated from their takes that we should not have signed this guy. to that large contract. But the contract and what we're going to do as we move forward, that's a discussion for another day. But I just want to get your quick take on kind of what's gone wrong with Vooch and he's still having a good year. I mean, if the season were to end right now, this is the second best season that he's ever had. So we can't really complain all that much. But before we sign off, Luke, you got any other takes you want to throw out there? Any last words?
I'm ready to play basketball, Jonathan.
Ready to play basketball.
Not me
Same
personally.
here.
I'm ready to watch it, but
that's what I mean. Ready for the league to start to play basketball. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So, well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Six Man Show. Like we've been doing it since day one, we're going to keep with the episodes every single Monday. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. For Luke, this has been Jonathan. Once again, thank you for tuning into the Six Man Show, and we will catch you guys next time. See ya.